So the Celtic concept of deity is different. Is different to what we would normally expect.
Well, let me wade ever further into that territory, if I may. I find it absolutely fascinating. But while you spoke there, another bear popped into my mind, with my Polish heritage. This bear called Wojciech, who I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who was found actually by the Polish prisoners who were. Do you know this tale?
No, I don't think so.
It's popped into my brain because he was found as a cub by the Polish prisoners who were kept in Siberia, and when they were released in 1941, they went all over the place. A lot of them went to Palestine to join up with the British Army, and they formed the Polish Second Corps, and they found a bear cub, and looked after it, and it travelled with them as their mascot, as the Polish Second Corps mascot, right through Italy. It grew up, and it became a full-size bear during the war. It was with them at the Battle of Monte Cassino as their, in quotes, mascot, and survived the war and came to this country and was in Edinburgh Zoo. Now that sent a tingle up my spine, really, because I'd not thought about that until this very second. But it is almost as if the bear was protecting them.
Yeah.
How interesting!
It's like it's kind of attached to them and is looking after them. I mean, one of the questions I ask about Artavis is, why is he not connected to Mars? Because we think Mars is the god of war, and of course, when you think of bears, you think of like berserkers from the Scandinavian area, and they feel quite warlike. Well, of course, a bear god must have had a warlike quality, because they're big, as we just said. They can kind of, if you get in a fight with a bear, it's going to kill you.
Yes,
but I think Artavis, by being related to Mercury, has all of these other levels to him, which would be the protector of the tribe, the protector of the group that he's with, and it's very, very much like that bear sounds. That story of that bear is, yes, there's this warlike aspect, but it's a protector aspect, somebody who's looking after and nurturing as well as fighting.
That's fascinating, nurturing as well as fighting, because the bear. Because one of the things I do resent about the way in which we chuck language around is that people often say, "Oh well, stop behaving like an animal," that. But actually, if we did behave more like animals and less like people,
yes,
it would be a nicer, because no bear actually goes to war, does it? A bear doesn't war. It uses its power in different ways, doesn't it? It's only we that go to war.
The predominant reason why a bear would attack is if something is going into its territory. So this is why there are bear attacks in kind of areas of America and Europe, because people are going into their territory. The bears don't kind of form up and invade. You kind of have to stumble onto it. That's why it attacks you. So you're right. I mean, I completely agree with you in terms of language. Phrases like, "Oh, it's just a dumb animal," and things like that. Actually, they're a lot more intelligent than us, I think, on occasion.
Well, yes. Can we touch on this notion of when you were talking there so fascinatingly about the notion of a deity being attached to or associated to a sort of natural feature, and you talked there, for example, about bears being associated with streams and waters, and so that's really interesting.
If you think about Bath, the deity at Bath was Aquasulis. Which before was a Celtic goddess in that area, and then the Romans just come along and kind of Latinize it. So they're attached to separate features. If you go to, it's quite near here, Chedworth Roman Villa, they have a nymphaeum, which is my favourite part of the whole site, because it's this well that was worshipped as where the goddess was kind of housed.
How interesting. Because it isn't a quality of water as such. That's what is it that's linking the water to the bear? Is it? Just...
Oh no, these are separate deities.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
in some places it's attached to a bear. In some places it's attached to a stream or a spring or a rock or a tree. It's something that is powerful in their landscape that the Celts used to attach the deity to. So in Bath, it's Aqua Sulis. It's the deity there, whereas in Bern, it's the bear.
And have the Christians just crushed this out of us? And my ignorance as I stumbled into a misunderstanding at that very moment. Is that because our sensibilities, or at least my sensibilities, and people like me in the mainstream, the so-called mainstream of English, British, European culture, is that because we've had it crushed out and my mind can't really fully comprehend this, but it was there and it's gone.
But yes, to answer the question in one word, yes, I do. And I know that some people get very angry and angsty about that, and like all the Christians crushed it. I don't. There are I see large connections between Christianity and the faith I follow, which is this modern reconstruction of Druidry. There are lots of similarities. It's just for a long time our brains have operated in a different way. And if you think about the difference, we're kind of heading back in that direction, I think, because if you think about like a monotheistic God, a single God, the idea of the Christian God is he will look after us, and that we can pretty much do what we want and God will judge us and look after us. If you think about the Celtic approach, which is much more based on natural features, if you look after that natural feature, it's, to use a modern day term, it's more sustainable because you then worship the river and look after the river rather than thinking that someone's going to look after it for you.
Yes. And this notion, that's very interesting. That turns a whole new light onto the word worship, doesn't it? It's more about a sort of relationship of humility to the natural landscape, which Christianity has. I mean, it's very interesting when you travel about and you see, for instance, in Ireland, you come across, because I think well, I don't know, but my suspicion would be that ill-educated suspicion would be that Celtic Christianity is closer to Celtic theology, as it were, than here. But you come across springs and so on, don't you? Which have become, almost all the springs seem to me to be associated now with the Virgin Mary and so on. But they still have this holy quality, don't they? And holy water and all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the goddesses were very often associated with springs, and like exactly what you say, in Ireland that has translated into the worship of springs in a Christian sense through the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary, obviously, in a lot of other Christian faiths, is not as important as she is in kind of Irish Catholic belief, and that is because there are a large number of Celtic goddesses who are associated with the land and features of Ireland, who is kind of turned into either saints. So, for example, one of the main Celtic goddesses that is worshipped in Ireland, but also across the British Isles in a pagan sense, is called Bridget. And she is the goddess of the hearth. We particularly celebrate her on the 2nd of February, which is Imbolc. And there is a Saint Bridget as well, who is a Christian saint. And the two in mythology have kind of become intermixed. So we've got the Bridget, the deity, the goddess, and Saint Bridget, the nun, who have kind of become the same person.
Interesting. Very interesting. And the segue from there, less than elegant, takes me to, but it's popped a thought into my mind about C.S. Lewis, funnily enough, what you just said there, because in Lion, the Witch and Wardrobe, the animals speak and they move around and they have life and spirit and energy and magic, I think, in some cases, and the opposite of that is when they become non-talking animals, and I forget who, I think it's the White Witch or something.
Yes.
Does that to them. So that jumps this thought into my mind here, going back to your book. And you write about coming back to the 21st century, particularly the M5 was a horrible shock to the system. We can all empathise with that. As I drove home, I reflected that none of the archaeological evidence that Erin considers in her article was connected to my home county, Warwickshire, and yet I am surrounded by bears. I live in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the most well-known stage direction by the town's famous son, and both my listeners will already be saying it, and this is one of those moments where when I read it, I thought, oh yeah, William Shakespeare is exit pursued by a bear from Act 3, Scene 3 of The Winter's Tale.
Yep.
And there we are. There's another feature. Now, tell us the story of, if you care to, about the bear and that particular bear, who it was thought it might be associated with. You go on to describe that very interestingly.
Yeah, again, talking about hidden in plain sight. The play that got me in to Shakespeare and made me move to Stratford and do my MA in Shakespeare studies was The Winter's Tale. Oh. I did it for A-level. Had a really inspirational teacher because I'd done Macbeth at GCSE and fell asleep. But I had a really inspirational teacher who just got me into this play, and I just fell in love with The Winter's Tale. Yeah. To the point where it was the first Shakespeare that I went to see in the theatre. I went to London to see it. It was the first play I directed by myself. When I was at university, I directed The Winter's Tale. I ended up being in it when I was at the Shakespeare Institute. And then, of course, I ended up teaching it in various... So, this play's always kind of been there with me. But, yeah, they think that the bear in The Winter's Tale may have been a real bear. There is still this kind of discussion because they were baby bears that were kept in London at the time. Obviously, the theatres in London were close to bear baiting pits, but it's specifically, they think it was a couple of baby polar bears that are noted in Henslow's diary could well have been the bear that was used at the Globe in The Winter's Tale.
How interesting.
Rather than a person in a suit, because it is a notoriously difficult bit of the play to do, because everyone's kind of waiting for it. Yes. And unless a blooming great big bear wanders onto the stage, you kind of feel a little bit left out. I mean,
have you ever seen it done really, really well?
Oh, yes. The best one was, it was an RSC production in about 1992 or 93. John Nettles was playing Leontes. And on it, they kind of had a storm going, so the lightning was going off. And they brought on a person in a huge bear suit. And I was sitting at such an angle that I just saw it coming at me, and it looked so realistic. Wow. There was a genuine moment of panic of, oh God, they've got a real bear on. which was like, oh, and then it was like, actually, this is wonderful. This is just exactly what I've always wanted it to be. Because whenever I've been in it or directed it, obviously you can't have a bear. So to be able to have that resource of having someone in an enormous costume just worked. It came on all fours and then stood up onto its back legs to kill Antigonus. It was wonderful.
And am I to infer from what you've written here that and what you've just said that maybe I forget where it would have been, the Globe or the theatre, but that they actually had a bear, a polar bear.
They may well have had a polar bear that came on at that point and chased Antigonus off.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
It is, isn't it? Because, the little polar bears would have been trained to do tricks. And so they would have been, before their later life ended up in the bear baiting pits, presumably. But they would have been fairly tame. So to get the bear just to kind of walk on and somebody run away from it, the audience would have been used to seeing bears from the bear baiting pits next door. So for them, it wouldn't have been as spectacular as it was for us, but it would still add a nice level of realism in there.
Because I suppose bears were in at the beginning of the 17th century, were bears still wild in our forests?
We're not quite sure. We're not quite sure. The article that I quote in the book isn't sure. She can't really tell us exactly when. But probably not.
But they would have had there would still have been this very strong folk resonance, wouldn't there? Of crikey, yes. These are beautiful and magnificent and terrifying.
Yes,
things.
And of course, the polar bear being the odd colour, being the white, would have been slightly more exotic than the bears that they were using in the bear baiting pits.
Those poor little animals. Yes, you quote Philip Henslow saying, 2 polar bear cubs which were brought back from the waters off Greenland.
Mm.
In 1609, before they even knew about America, or at least before we knew. Of course, the Americans knew all about America because they were living there. But they were brought back from Greenland. Good Lord.
Yeah. And so the audience would just not really have seen anything like that before. So that would have been a really spectacular moment.
Those poor little cubs, and their mother would probably have been... Well, I don't want to get too depressed.
The mother was probably killed, which is why they brought the bear cubs back.
Oh, my Lord.
I mean, there's one of the bits in the book. I mean, as an animal lover and as a vegan, there are bits of this book which have been very difficult to write.
Yeah.
One of the primal things that I talk about is Hallowell's investigations into the bear hunts that used to happen in cultures all the way around the world. He found lots and lots of similarities between them, but they would quite often kill the mother and then take the bear cub in for a year and look after the bear cub for a year before slaughtering it a year later. But they would look after it very, very well and kind of treat it as like a king. But then the poor thing was killed a year later and kind of ceremonially eaten. But so, some of it has been difficult and challenging from an animal lover's point of view.
I don't blame you.
There are some fairly modern bear practices which I've avoided because, try to avoid all of that.
Yes, you do actually, because thankfully, but it needs to be spoken about. Good Lord. Now then, time is running away with me. We ought to do 6 episodes about this because it's literally so interesting. But now I'm going to leap. I'm tempted to say let's do a second episode or a third because I'm going to do this in 2 halves as it happens. But because there is so much here which is kind of catalytic for grappling with modern times actually. As you just referenced, what it made me think of while you were talking there was the extraordinary way in which we treat animals in this country is just and in this in our world is quite abysmal in fact. But the Wagyu beef thing, where these animals are treated, as you just said, almost magisterially as they're kind of animal monarchs and massaged and all, and then killed.
Yeah.
And eaten.
Yeah.
God, pardon my friend.
One of the things that people always say to me about whenever they, as a vegan, people do challenge you fairly often. Like, well, if everybody ate plants, what would happen to all the cows? And I kind of say to them, well, cows did exist before we ate them. Not everything. I mean, unfortunately, everything in our world has to be of use to humanity. Otherwise, we kind of get rid of it. And you still see that argument, which is, well, just let the cow live. Let the cow do what the cow wants to do and be what the cow wants to be. And it doesn't have to have a purpose for us. It can just exist on its own. It doesn't have to be a product, and that's quite a big shift of worldview from where we currently are.
But don't you think? I was saying this to Kira. I'm vegan also, and Kira isn't. But nevertheless, I don't try to persuade her or anything. But we talk about these things about in 1,000 years' time, people will look back on this as being just appalling. Really.
Yeah, and it is because I'm like you. I don't try to convince anyone. I live with someone who eats meat and dairy and all of that. Not often because I do most of the cooking. So she's quite happy to kind of eat what I dish up. But it's the secret is open. Everybody, we know what we do in those places. We know how we treat those animals. It's just there. You've just got to look at it and go, okay, I'm not prepared to accept that anymore. Yes. But it is an open secret. Yes. That's why I don't necessarily nag people, because it's like, what I know.
Yes. And that brings to, there's so many, I'm skipping over so many things here. We've touched on the dark materials, but there's about 2 hours conversation about the bear there. And you've taught me a great deal about Beowulf, for example. I had, and then you talk about then there's the whole piece about, the astronomical links to bears and so on. Yep. And perhaps we can touch on a bit of that. This is going to be an inadequate jump, but beautiful. And again, another example of your beautiful writing where you say a bit later on in the book where you talk about, now this is going to load effectively. And you're writing here about Eleanor and you say, while this section does play into the wider narrative about booking tradition, played out in the beautiful, fast-flowing river with one character in the figure of a bear, the film seems to be encouraging us to get out into the wilderness and become wild ourselves.
This is Brave. This is the Disney film Brave.
Yeah. Yes. However, while a touch of wildness may be healing, the film also warns us about giving into our wild side too much. At several points, while she's in bear form, Eleanor loses herself completely, her transformation into a bear becoming mental as well as physical, to the point where she begins to attack her daughter. It turns out that being half bear and half human is the perfect balance, just like the ancient myths told us. That's spectacular, Andrew. That's spectacularly written.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's I've watched Brave a couple of times, and what the film purports to be about and what it tells you it's about just doesn't match up with what I ever walk away from it with. It is that the mother is happier when she's half bear and half human, and the film ends with her having lost a lot of the kind of the social constrictions that bind her in and make her feel that she has to behave in a certain way. So all of that kind of disappears and she becomes wilder and freer, just not completely wild and completely animal.
When we say wild, of course, we mean different to human. Wild is, human understanding of, as it were, kind of modern Western understanding of what we mean by wild is kind of football hooligan, mass murderer. That is not what you mean by wild, is it?
No, it's about being in touch with things and at one with things. So the mother, for example, as I said, she wades into the stream in that film, and she can't hunt the salmon, and she has to learn how to hunt the salmon by kind of understanding how the salmon flows up the stream. So it's about looking at the natural cycles, the eddies, the flows, and going with that, rather than it's what we were saying before about how bears don't go to war and we say, oh, stop behaving like an animal. Actually, the animals are doing this kind of thing where they're kind of connected and they understand the world. We don't. We've become so kind of far distanced from it that we're kind of constrained with human society. And that means we don't understand the world outside our window, really. And it's about becoming more in tune with that world rather than these kind of odd, strange norms that we put on ourselves, really.
And perhaps even beyond this world.
Yeah.
That takes me to this. We ought to finish with this, I think, because it's beautiful. Okay. And I'd like to hear you riff on this a bit, where you talk about in this beautiful section called "And He Was Made of Stars."
Oh, beautiful picture.
Totally. And you write about your Glastonbury trip, I think. So if I just go back a bit, deep in the autumnal woodland, a badger sits among ferns and grasses, looking up at a silvery, opaque figure before him. It is the figure of a bear, standing on its hind legs, looking down beneficently at the badger at his feet. Trails of light and stars emanate from the bear, weaving through the woodland and out into the night sky, where the constellation of Ursa Major runs beneath the moon. A chalk white horse glints in the moonlight. The bear's coat shimmers with stardust. A small crescent moon hangs above the hares. And the title of this piece of work is "And He Was Made of Stars." Wow. Yeah. Floor is yours. Tell us more about that.
It's part of this kind of serendipity that I found while writing the book, of things that appeared to me. And I was in Glastonbury and I found this picture, this card called "And He Was Made of Stars." And it is this badger looking at this bear. And it is astonishing because we don't have the bear left in this country anymore, but our mini version of the bear is the badger. And there is this mythological, spiritual connection between badgers and bears in the British Isles, so that the badger is like the remaining representative of the bear on our lands. And this picture just depicts that beautifully. It is that the badger looking up at like his granddad, and that's the bear looking back down on him. And it is such a beautiful, beautiful image. And the bear is see-through, very much like the RTO that I described at the beginning with the translucent coat. But this one's got stars and moons and planets through it. And it is just beautiful, because although the bear isn't physically present in this country anymore, it still has an energy here. It still has a spirit and a presence on this land through badgers, but also kind of through our other myths like the Warwickshire bear and King Arthur and those things as well. So although our bear is missing and has been missing for a long time, it is still here, just in a more obscure way.
We ought to just name check Hannah Willow, shouldn't we? Because
Hannah Willow.
You've kindly included a link in your book to her website, and of course, when I went on it, her work is astonishing, is it not?
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. That I couldn't get a copy of it to go in the book, so I link people through to her website, because although they may not pick that one up, but I know from talking to Hannah and from seeing some of her other work, she's developed this now. She's like looking at a story and a story book with the bear and the badger, this kind of real badger and this spirit bear. And so now more and more of these are appearing on her website and on her Instagram feed. And every time I see them, they're just stunning and beautiful. And
it's so worth it. I'll put a link in the podcast and the YouTube thing, because you pop onto her site and you everything you see you want.
Yeah, I've got one kind of out at the moment, which is a hare, which is again the white horse is behind it, but the hare is leaping through the sky over the white horse, and it's a beautiful, beautiful image.
Now then, I'm going to take a brief pause because I have to go in a moment, because my friend Dave is I'll cut this bit out because I don't imagine Dave would like to appear in this. Hello, Dave. I'll be with you I'll just unmute you. I will cut this out, I promise. Dave, I'm just finishing up. I'll be 2 minutes, so won't be too long. Won't be too long. I'm just doing a recording with Andrew here. Dave is kind enough to, he's going to do a piece for ZTE, a piece of Thomas More.
Oh, very nice.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I like the puckering the letter to puckering last night.
Oh, crikey.
It's very much in our area. That's because Becky's PhD was on Thomas Kidd. So
is it? How interesting. Serendipity. So I'll briefly pause and I'll pop back into, hope you can hear me, Dave. Don't go away. Don't go away. Don't go away. Can you hear me? Nod if you can hear me. You can. Excellent. I'll be 2 minutes. So I'll come. I might leave this in actually, because it's quite Dave Gouldston there, one of the finest minds I have ever come across. So now, Andrew, let's finish up with how can we possibly? There's no good place to do tell us about the bear link to Beowulf, and then anything else you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up.
Well, Beowulf's name is Beowulf, which is a kenning. All the way through, they use these funny kennings all the way through Beowulf, and a Beowulf is a bear, so it's another name for a bear. So that's where we get the word Beowulf from. And of course, Beowulf is a bear. So it's in the same way in Beowulf they refer to the sea as the whale road, which is just amazing. I love that, frankly. But of course, Beowulf being this adventurer, kind of hero figure that we see in what is essentially the first piece of English literature, who goes on great big journeys. It's the basis for things like Lord of the Rings. And he is a hero, and that hero is what we call a bear son. It comes from a kind of a line of mythology where heroes who were human, but they had like a bear mother, so they're half human, half bear again, went out and adventured, went into the underworld and came out again stronger and kind of being able to heal their societies. And we see it in people like Ulysses and other big characters as well in early myth. But he's a bear son. And he is our first piece of English literature, and he is a representative of the bear.
Fascinating. It's a must read, Andrew, and I'm so glad that you've written it. It's taught me. This book has taught me so much, and it's in the best tradition of great teaching. It's raised so many questions in my mind and made me so curious to follow up as many of the leads as many of the paw prints that you've left in the forest for us to follow. And it's beautifully written. It's astonishingly well researched.
Yes,
and if I may say, as a humble reader, I'm saying that. But so
thank you. That does mean a lot. That really does mean a lot. So thank you.
Wow, good. I hope everybody buys it, and I hope it's part of the. We've got to be optimistic, haven't we? Maybe things are going to change as we move out of the shadow of Donald Trump and out of the shadow of Brexit and Boris Johnson, and perhaps there are forests that will delight, amaze, and terrify us, into which we shall emerge.
Let's hope so. We need more forests. We definitely need more forests. So let's hope that RTO and Artemis are maybe not hiding in there waiting for us, but let's hope that they look after those forests for us.
Good. Thank you, Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you very much.